All right, and here we are. As always, let me request everybody watching both in the live chat on the and from the Moore's Law is Dead Discord. Give me a little message if the audio sounds okay. It's always what we got to do because YouTube does not let you restart. Let's see, write down what are we at here? July loose ends. My notes so I can have timestamps right after we're done. All right. So here we are. We're on the Moore's Law is Dead live stream at the end of the month. I'm actually trying to catch up. I was so busy over the summer that I don't know if you guys noticed, but we almost missed an entire month. Technically, the June loose ends was in the last half of July, and I apologize for that. We're starting to catch up. And for those who don't know, this is where I answer questions about anything you guys have. I mean, I considered doing this at the beginning of the week, but I knew I'd have a big RDNA 4 video, and I think we can all agree it would be better to put out that report and then field questions. And I got to say, I have already received from the Moore's Law said patrons, I think 2/3 of the questions are about RDNA 4. So that is definitely going to be the major focus of this episode. But, if you're not a patron, remember you can submit free questions ahead of time if you are, or in the Moore's Law's Dead Discord as well in the After Video channel. But you can also, and it's always appreciated, provide a tip in the live chat, and I will get to them in order as I work through all the subjects for this episode. And as I often do, I actually want to start this episode with a little leak that I didn't feel like I had time to put into anything else. So it's all about Intel's 14th gen Raptor Lake refresh. And from what I am hearing, despite what other rumors I thought I saw a couple months ago suggested, Raptor Lake refresh, the i9-14900K, and so on and so forth, this could possibly be ready, let me think, in about 7 weeks from now. So that means not necessarily mid-October. From what I've been told, um, got two sources that I reached out to double check actually even before recording. Person at Intel tells me that it will be basically all done and manufactured or being manufactured in a couple weeks from now. And once that's done, it's just how quickly can they package and ship it? Usually that's 4 weeks at the quickest. But if you think about it, then by the last week, maybe even the last half of this month, Intel will already be mass producing Raptor Lake products that have already been validated entirely and finalized. And so I think it's a totally plausible that at the end of September, we will already have Raptor Lake reviews. Certainly, we will have a full unveiling by then. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Intel started revealing Raptor Lake SKUs at the end of this month. And then I reached out to someone else who has contacts at Intel that they work with. This person tells me that, yeah, they've already been tipped off that Raptor Lake could launch in September. So, it's not the most interesting generation, but it is a solid uplift. And it's funny to think about Raptor Lake refresh or Intel's 14th desktop gem and realize that if this doesn't feel like a big uplift, just remember this uplift, 13th gen to 14th gen, will be a bigger uplift than what we got from half of Intel's generations for like a decade or something. So it is fun to look back and think about how even these minor updates, like these plus architectures, if you will, are still bigger uplifts than what we got from, like, I don't know, certainly than what we got from Haswell to like Devil's Canyon and Skylake to Kaby Lake. So, all right, that's the first opening leak. I also wanted to touch on briefly in the beginning here about the PlayStation 5 Slim that has been pictured. And I got to say that links in the description. There's pictures, someone has a video of it. It really just unsurprisingly looks like a smaller PlayStation 5. That is to say, they have not changed the overall design. It still's got the popped collar look. It looks like an alien, spaceship or something, and or like some kind of device from like a weird Mass Effect civilization. I was kind of hoping they do a bigger redesign. I actually kind of like how the PS5 looks, to be honest. I'm one of those people that doesn't think it looks great, but I think it looks good. I know it's a very divisive look. Having said that, I think it could look better, and I'm a little disappointed in that. Having said that, the Slim's still just using 6 nanometer. They're cutting down power, size, and cost a lot, but not as much as before. And that's just because, unlike previous generations, it doesn't really make sense to die shrink these things. At least not yet. Could I see a PlayStation 5 Slim or Super Slim, as you might put it, eventually, that uses like 5 nanometer or something? I could, but it's somewhat unlikely. And so that's why it's not getting that much smaller, though. So I don't know. That's all there is really to say. If you look at the PlayStation 5 editions in 2021, 1 year after it came out, they had already massively reduced weight. In 2022, they reduced weight and cost even more. And as things continue, this is just another iteration, really. That's really all I have to say about it. I'm actually a little surprised it didn't come earlier. Okay. Now, let me get to the Patreon reader mails. But before I get those tipped questions coming, this might be a shorter episode as I do have to start packing up for the move this weekend to a new house. Um, but let me see here. So before I get to all of the RDNA 4 questions, this piece of content is brought to you by Micro Center. Micro Center is opening up yet another new store in Charlotte, North Carolina, the second new store in 8 years. And I've already been told, and I think other people have heard this, they're opening up more as well. I think one's coming to Miami. They already brought one to Indianapolis that just opened up. So check around for Micro Centers over the next year. They are really expanding a lot due to recent success. And I've actually heard that they might be getting more exclusive products because products sold from Micro Center just sell better than other locations. So Micro Center is doing well. You might want to double check. They could be coming to a city near you soon. And when they do, you can visit the store. They'll give you a free 128 gigabyte flash drive like they are right now at Charlotte, and they were, and I think still are at Indianapolis. And also, if you buy anything worth $100 or more, which is basically any computer component, you get $25 off. And that includes the 5600X 3D. And then additionally, if you submit pictures of your build, you get another $25 off. And it doesn't need to be a competition. They wanted me to tell you guys that, by the way. It's not a competition for the best looking build. It's just if it looks even okay, they'll give you a $25 off coupon. So if you spend $100, $25 off, submit a picture, $25 off. There's usually a $50 off motherboards. They're giving away 64 gigabytes of free RAM with the 7900X. Last time I checked, it's absolutely absurd. You can basically get a 12 core Zen 4 for free. Now is a great time to build if you do, and I do mean that, by the way. Now is an excellent time to build. I think some people have missed that prices have been cut in half cut down by to what, a fourth of where they were during the shortages. So it's a great time to build. And if you do, use the links in the description. Please, everyone watching, if you click on the links in the description for Micro Center, that itself helps the channel a lot. And, they're the best place really to go to build, or one of the best places out there. So check out Micro Center today. All right. Now let me get right into some of these questions here. First one is from TMC Payton, since I still don't see any tipped questions. And it's about Raptor Lake Refresh. Let's see. RPL-R upgrade. Put down a timestamp. All right. TMC Payton writes in and says, "Howdy. Would you consider Raptor Lake Refresh as a worthwhile upgrade for Alder Lake owners? For example, I have an i7-12700K with a DDR4 motherboard, and I'm gaming at 1440p 240 hertz, but I'm not trying to limit this to just me. I think this is a good general question. I really like the i7-12700K. It has 8 Golden Cove P cores, which I think is really the first question you should ask yourself if you're thinking of upgrading to Raptor Lake Refresh. Do you have 8 P cores? If you do, I don't know how much you're actually going to notice the other cores. If you do Cinebench, you might, but for gaming, you're really not. And for a lot of tasks today, that's 8 big cores, 4 little cores. So even background tasks will be offloaded. You got 12 cores total. But anyways, my actual advice, I'd say if you see an i9-14900K for like $500 or lower, it would be an upgrade, especially, in certain games that don't benefit as much from DDR5. Yeah, you're looking at something at least 10% better in multi-threading. That's like, like double the performance or something of your i7. or more maybe. Having said that, I don't see that as that big of an uplift really in day-to-day usage, and you don't have a DDR5 platform. I think Raptor Lake Refresh, its main benefits are gonna come from using the latest DDR5, which is now dirt cheap. I mean, again, like I said, Micro Center is giving it away. So if you have like 6,000, 7,000 mega transfer DDR5, or of course 8,000, that's where like an i9-14900K is gonna really be able to stretch its legs. And I don't know. I don't really see it, TMC, for you. The people that I think should be interested in Raptor Lake Refresh are people who especially maybe have an i5 12600K in a DDR5 platform. Yeah, I mean, look, you can go from a 10 core i5 to a 20 core i7 14700K for like 450. It'll be wildly stronger, and in games with fast DDR5, I mean, I think you could see 10-20% or more boosts in frame rate, and even more in multi-threading. So for people like that, Raptor Lake Refresh makes some sense to me. And I think there's a lot of people like that. I think there's a lot of people that bought the i5 because it had 6 big cores and 4 little cores and said that's more than enough for now, and I can upgrade in the future. And they can, and they're right. So, that's who it's for. But again, if you have something like a Raptor Lake i9, you're getting like 5 to 10% more performance. I don't know. I don't really see the upgrade there, but if you get a good deal and you have a DDR5 platform with an i7 or i5 from Alder Lake, that's really who I think Raptor Lake Refresh is mostly for when it comes to upgrading. Okay, let me move on here. Duh, duh, duh. All right, and now let me get a Navi 32 question out of the way. We'll talk about it more on the upcoming Broken Silicon next week, but I thought one Navi 32 question and answer here would be good considering everyone's endlessly talking about the 7800 XT or whatever. So Golden Bolt writes in and says, there have been some leaks from AIBs suggesting that Navi 32 SKUs will in fact be using an XT moniker. Does this change your expectations for price and or performance? I thought about this question quite a bit, and I think this question is the perfect one to kind of all encompass, because I know Power Color had some page go up for like what wasn't it like over a day? Power Color had the 7800 XT page there. In fact, I'm just being honest, seeing the 7800 XT page there for over a day. Like if I was AMD, I would have contacted Power Color immediately and been like, what the hell are you doing? That really does raise some suspicion for me. Like, I get mistakes. Like, how many times does Gigabyte accidentally leak like the 308020 gigabyte, but then, well, the 308020 gigabyte never comes out? You know, I just wonder how much this is either AMD intentionally giving AIBs bad info or just telling AIBs to open up their webpage for an entire day. Because that just seems so sloppy to me. I have to let my eyebrows raise. Having said that, though, my honest to God answer to you, Golden Bolt, is it doesn't really matter what AMD does. I can only tell you what they can do, right? I can only leak Navi 3231 hybrid as this compact Navi 31 configuration, or leak Navi 32, like what it looks like, what it could be, what I'm hearing. I can't make AMD be smart, right? I can only tell you what's possible. I can't tell you what the final decision will be. In fact, does anyone remember the RX 5600 XT from RDNA 1? Google it. If you don't remember what happened, look it up. AMD prepared an RX 5600 XT with some specs, and then, like, last minute review day, AMD updated the specs. I'm not kidding. Last minute, they released a BIOS update that overclocked the RAM. So that's how much can be changed last minute, not just names or pricing, but sometimes these companies know that like 90% of their AIBs used RAM that's above their spec, and they can also update that in clock speeds last minute with a higher TDP if they want to. So I would just suggest that anything you're seeing out there right now, as far as I'm aware, Navi 32 still doesn't launch for about mm, uh, 4 to 5 weeks or 3 to 5 weeks. So there's still time for them to make last minute changes. And some of this could be messing with people. What it really comes down to is, in my opinion, anything called a 7800 XT should at least have 70 compute units and faster than 18 gigabit per second memory. So at least 19.5 gigabit per second. Like I heard, and like I think I saw some other people on Twitter saying as well recently. With those speeds, you're looking at enough bandwidth, enough CUs that if it's clocked above 2.5 gigahertz, yeah, you're probably getting something that slightly beats the 6900 XT. In fact, I think this is worth pointing out. I understand the 7900 Golden Rabbit edition is only like what? It's isn't it? It's like a little weaker than a 69. It's like exactly a 6950 XT, I think, in performance around there. Um, that one has really low clock speeds, and it also has low memory speeds. If you were to take that 2.2 gigahertz card with 80 compute units and 18 gigabit per second memory and throw it up against a 70 compute unit model like 2.5, 2.6 gigahertz and faster memory, I think I think actually the 70 compute unit model might win. So I think that's just worth pointing out. That really does seem like a low volume special edition just for specific markets. And I still think there's room for AMD to be smart about this. But I can't promise you they will. That's what I think a 7800 XT should be. It should be a little stronger than the 6900 XT, $600 at most to be okay. Not saying it's great, but that's what it needs to be at a minimum. And anything else, I think will be stupid. So let's just leave it at that. I think and that is why I think the best thing for AMD to do is not give any Navi 32 an XT monitor or moniker. Launch a $500 to $550 7800 that's cheaper than last gen. It'll be a little better, or be around a 6800 XT in performance. That'll be meh. But if it's $500, it'll be decent. And if the 7700 was 400, it'll be decent. And I just think that's what we're looking at. 400 to 450, 500 to 550, 7700, 7800. That's what I think it should be. For those who care, I believe all the Watts on Twitter, which I noticed that guy when he tweeted little Phoenix specs before a source confirmed the correct ones to me. So that's how I know he sometimes gets things before other people. All the Watts, for anyone who cares, says the exact same thing. 450, 550 or something, 7800, 7700. And I find it really suspicious AIB's just left a 7800 XT page up for days. Find that suspicious. And in fact, just so you people know, I reached out to people at AMD and Nvidia, and they thought it was suspicious. Like they were like, "Yeah, this is stuff we do all the time to mess with people." But if this isn't, if AMD actually tries to sell a card called the 7800 XT, that's the same performance as a 6800 XT for, I don't know, whatever I think that's dumb. At the end of the day, though, it's really still just the price that matters. So I guess if it was 500, be okay. I just still don't know why they wouldn't call it the 7800. But that's really all I can say. When it comes to expectations, my let's just remove expectations and say what I think it should be and what I've heard it should be and just leave it at that. If AMD makes a last minute stupid decision, something that neither me nor all the Watts nor other leakers heard, that's AMD's dumb decision. But that's all it is. Their last minute dumb decision. And again, the only other thing I would point out is they dropped the price and the name on the 7600 in the last month. I'd be surprised if they're not doing that here. Okay. Let me see here. All right, now let us finally move on to the RDNA for questions. I don't know if you guys saw that. Jessie just went insane. 'Cause my girlfriend came over and she probably heard that and sprinted downstairs. Remember hit the like button, everybody. This is the big thing, all the RDNA 4 questions, and I see there are almost 600 people watching right now. Hope that becomes at least 600 likes. Okay, RDNA 4. Frobos writes in and asks, it makes sense for AMD to wait on a high-end successor card to the 7900 XTX until there is a full generational leap in ray tracing and efficiency. What does this say here? Sorry, got distracted. Any guesses on the time frame of a successor that might arrive and what performance lift AMD could be targeting? What aspects of RDNA 4 are giving them trouble? Well, so you got two questions here. Any guess on the time frame a successor may arrive, and why is RDNA 4 having trouble? Okay, so it's not the overall architecture, right? From my understanding, the overall soft design, which I think I've explained this in videos before, but it's probably a good time to describe it now. There's the soft design of an architecture, the overall kind of the ratios, how it works, how overall things would work before you translate them onto a node. Then there's the hard design. A hard design is GA102, right? Nvidia had a soft design for Ampere, actually a couple, of course, that could be used at TSMC or Samsung. And Samsung, they decided to go with, and then they designed their hard designs there. That's where a lot of the money actually is, because that's where you're actually getting real specs, working through bugs. That's where the money's spent. So my understanding is the soft design of RDNA 4 shows plenty of promise. The architecture itself is fine. It's just the hard design of getting the elaborate chiplets to work together. That's the issue. And so think about it from AMD's perspective. If the overall RDNA 4 design is pretty dang good, but the chiplet tech itself they're trying to get working needs another year, why would you delay the whole architecture? Really, that chiplet, the issues with chiplets, probably over half of that, it needs to be worked through outside of even RDNA 4. So, what you'd really be saying is, well, we're going to bring out the high end a year late. Well, at that point, won't RDNA 5 basically be ready? See what I'm saying? So that's really what's going on here is RDNA 4 itself isn't bad. The way the chiplets are interfacing is having tons of issues. And that needs to be fixed. And by the time that's fixed, they might as well maybe use like RDNA 5 GCDs. And that's something I tried to really convey in that video that I put out last night. Like why it's complicated to say what's really canceled in RDNA 4 because when is RTX 5000 series coming out, right? There's a chance Nvidia may push that back. So if we have RDNA 4 mid-range launch, then RTX 5000, then a few months or 6 months later RDNA 5 high end, they're still competing in the high end with Nvidia. This is what happened with RDNA 1. RDNA 1 launched between Turing and Ampere, and then RDNA 2 launched against Ampere. I still think the RTX 5000 series will launch before RDNA 5 high end, but that I don't necessarily think RDNA 5 high end won't be closer to the 5000 series than the 6000. It's too early to say for sure, but that's what's going on. And so I think that answers both of your questions, Frobos. You know, when is RDNA 5 coming out? It's too early to be specific, but I would think less than 2 years after RDNA 4, especially because now they're freeing up all these other resources. Remember, a key part of the leak that I put out last night was that the RDNA 4 team was pulling away resources from tons of other groups like MI300, MI400, and even RDNA 5, and even outside companies that AMD goes to help with little things in IP blocks and stuff. So you think about all these groups that they could be using to help with other assets. At a certain point, you got to act something. And that's probably also explains to a certain extent what went wrong with Meteor Lake as well, by the way. It's like, well, we have the mobile version working. We have the 6 plus 16 core die. We keep pulling away resources to fix it. We don't want this to turn into Sapphire Rapids, where Sapphire Rapids is pulling away engineering resources to help from all these other projects that are now under more pressure because of it. Probably should just cancel the things we don't need. That's what I think's going on. So again, RDNA 4's architecture itself, there's no evidence this is bad. Like I think there's a reason, for example, Sony and Microsoft waited for RDNA 2 to launch their consoles because they were like, yeah, that's the version of RDNA that seems really good. Sony is waiting for RDNA 3. You might want to call it 3.75 for the PS5 Pro. If they are, that's because they thought RDNA 3 wasn't good enough, but this is. And maybe that's just only working perfectly in a monolithic form right now. And the stuff they're doing to fix the chiplets, might as well just wait for RDNA 5 and accelerate that. And again, they're saving resources that would have been wasted making Navi 41 work. Those are now going to be working on Navi 51 or whatever sooner. So that's probably the right call, especially when, you know, it's funny. I saw someone on Twitter say, why aren't you showing more disappointment in your video? And I said, well, it's just too soon to say if I'm disappointed. Like if there's an 8700 XT that gets you 4090 performance for $600 on 3 nanometer and a tiny die or something. That'd be awesome. I'd much rather have that than some new $2,000 card no one's actually going to buy, that devs won't actually program for because no one can actually afford it. But if it ends up like a 6900 XT for $400, yeah, I won't really care. That won't really excite me. It's just too early to say which way it's going to go, right? Is this Polaris to Vega or RDNA 1 to RDNA 2? We're going to have to see. It's too early to say, but I wouldn't say I'm disappointed until I see the benchmarks. All right, let's move on to the next question here. Rune Knight writes in, wouldn't it be better for the industry as a whole to have a big launch and then a small launch cadence for GPU releases? With the rising cost and complexity of designing new graphics architectures, it seems to me that having longer cycles between new architectures with a refresh in the middle that is merely a refinement of what's already out would help GPU companies deliver better products and save money and time in the long run. So let me see. Let me write down a little bit of a timestamp here. All right. So, honestly, I think what we're seeing is that AMD is realizing that they shouldn't be afraid to do this. Um, and I think what they're going to do is they always want to compete at all levels if it makes sense, but if it's financially stupid to double down on something that's problematic, they're gonna stop throwing good money after bad. Even if it wouldn't be a complete disaster, they're gonna go, well, God, we could be making money in AI, server, mobile, and we're still a company that's like massively smaller than Intel and smaller than AMD relative to how many to Nvidia relative to how many markets they're in. So, look, let's give an example here. If AMD could have had a big RDNA 1 5900 XT ready to fight the 2080 Ti in quarter 1 of 2019, I think they would have. I think they would have been happy to do that, but it had issues, and they said, it's a lot more important than the 5900 XT? Zen 2 and Epic. And so they said, not worth it. Let's just focus our money on other things. So, and I think that's what we're going to see moving forward. I think you're going to see AMD going like they really have been, frankly, for the past decade. They did this with Polaris too. Just looking back and going, okay, RDNA 5, we got it working and we think it's going to win. Just like RDNA 2, we're actually going to go for the high end this gen. Then RDNA 6 rolls around and they're like this new super 3D stacking quantum technology, whatever RDNA 6 is. If there even is an RDNA 6, they'll go, is this progressing well? Is this going to have a bunch of roadblocks? Is this going to get bad reviews? If we don't feel it will, then we're going to go for the high end again. If this just seems like what we tried isn't ready, but we can have a good high end anyways, but not an enthusiast end, that's what we're going to do. And so I think we're already seeing AMD decide that they're going to do this. It wouldn't surprise me if Nvidia started adopting this as well, if it starts getting to the point where like 90% of their money's from AI or something, by the way. Chris Rich writes in and asks, AMD's Zen product line probably makes around 10 times the revenue of their Radeon product line, which probably explains why AMD can afford to have backup plans, as you laid out with your Zen 5 leak, where they are designing both 3 and 4 nanometer variants, which they are. It's interesting. Going further, should AMD take a safer approach with product development for Radeon and aim lower from the start? I'd say no personally, but that's just my opinion, and I want to hear your thoughts. I am specifically talking about the design side. Shouldn't they start low and go high? Aren't they already, Chris Rich? I mean, think about it. APUs, Strix Point in quarter 1 or 2 next year, then Halo. APUs are getting RDNA 3.5 first. And then they're bringing out a PS5 Pro with the next gen architectures, mid range, you might say, or maybe lower high end, depending on how it turns out. And then they're going with the RDNA 4 mid range and then RDNA 5 high end. These architectures all build on each other. I'd say they are already doing this. 3.5 comes to tiny APUs first, then 4 to mid range, then 5 to high end. They're already doing it. They're already starting low and then scaling up with or in order of how easy it will be to do. That I would argue they're already doing it. Swiggles writes in and says, "Hey Tom, there's a lot of M's at the end of my name. Is AMD planning on making any fundamental changes to their approach to ray tracing with RDNA 4 or RDNA 5? For example, AMD's architecture has been said to be poor for multiple, well, not really multiple, just tons of light bounces. Shall we say light bounce spam is what RDNA's architecture really has a major weakness in right now. Will we only see a small performance dip with ray tracing in the future at least? So I don't know what your definition of small is. And, I don't know what you call fundamental, but RDNA 4, I'm told, I actually was told this quite a while ago. I've said it multiple times, makes a more fundamental change to the ray tracing, how it's handled. And the short answer is just yes, but I can't tell you the exact performance dip that you'll get. I can only tell you that there's a major focus on ray tracing and geometry performance and efficiency with RDNA 4, probably because it was designed for the PS5 Pro. And that's all there really is to say. The only other thing I would add is really like hypothetically what I think it should try to do. What I think it should try to do is if you set ray tracing to high in, let's say, 2024 games, the performance difference between Lovelace and RDNA 4 pretty much isn't there. Now, if you crank it up to ultra and really crank it up, um, I mean, it's a matter of opinion, isn't it? I mean, you can say it'd be great if AMD caught up to Nvidia's, you know, overdrive ray tracing performance, but doesn't that waste die space? And aren't you running the game at 30 frames per second at that point, anyways? I think what AMD needs to get together, what they really need to fix is not necessarily, full path tracing as well as Nvidia, because that's really not going to be the standard, like in an absurd way for another decade. I think what AMD needs to do though is make it so that, like right now, if you turn ray tracing on older games to low, RDNA 3 isn't really much worse than Lovelace sometimes. Well, it depends on the older game because a lot of older games are programmed for NVIDIA's architecture. So that's actually a huge caveat. But in a lot of low ray tracing games right now, RDNA 4, RDNA 3, I mean to say, actually can beat NVIDIA. It's is in some recent games. The second you crank up ray tracing, it loses. I don't think AMD should try to like beat Nvidia at running path tracing at 20 frames a second because I think that's a stupid waste of die space. What I think they should try to do is catch up to Nvidia and path tracing on high, like ray tracing on high, and that's what I would advise they should be trying to accomplish with RDNA 4 because it's always ebb and flow. It's always, well, how much effort, how much die space, how much cost do we put into ray tracing performance at a super high level versus making the thing cost 20% less or increasing raster. And I think we're in 2023, we'll be in 2024 when RDNA 4 comes out. It is time for AMD to stop treating ray tracing as a checkbox or something you can turn on if you have a strong card at medium settings. It's time to start treating it like, let us crank it up to high. But I don't know. I don't think like Cyberpunk Overdrive mode, which is really there. It's just stupid mode. I mean, it's so dumb. I'd say that's just kind of a waste of money to try to beat Nvidia at that, especially because they're not. I mean, Nvidia's got a head start here. The best thing AMD can do is try to do high ray tracing more efficiently and cheaper. And it's time for them to take that seriously. I don't think they're going to like beat Lovelace or Blackwell actually at full path tracing in 8K. But I also don't think that's what consumers really want right now. Anyways. All right, so that's that question. Now, let me put down a timestamp for this because I actually got a couple of really interesting questions here. How is RTG regarded? Again, remember to hit the like button and also remember to submit any tip questions you want to right now. Let me see. Yeah. All right. Let me just make sure I'm not missing something. Yeah. Okay. All right. So QH Freddy writes in and he asks, is the upper management at AMD content with the repeated stumblings of Radeon Group? What are they doing, if anything, about RTG's inability to meet their promises and deliver competitive products? So I actually reached out to a couple of people before we started recording QH Freddy. The question basically is, do does the upper management and even to another extent, a lot of the people that work at AMD regard Radeon in a bad way. And obviously, some of this will have my opinion in it, but keep in mind before I say this, I'm just communicating what people at AMD say. Nobody talks shit about RTG at QH Freddy. No one. And that's because they know that they get significantly less funding than the other groups. And you're talking about one part of AMD, one part of a $173 million company competing with a $1 trillion company in Nvidia. No, they don't think they're stupid for still holding 20 to 30% market share and dominating console. They think they are a miracle. I'm not kidding. Someone used that word. So you can get mad at AMD if you want. And certainly I have a lot to say about their individual stupid things they do. But if your question is a bunch of people at RTG about to be sacked? No. Lisa Su, thinks it's a miracle they're even doing as well as they are. And I do think every now and then people just need to take a step back and go, we are talking about a minority of a $173 million company competing with a $1 trillion company. They're winning consoles and they hold like 20 to 30. Some people think that a lot of the reportings out there are pretty off, by the way. They hold, let's say, 25 to 35% of GPU market share once you remove miners. So, no, they are not considered badly QH Freddy. And I really think people need to keep all that stuff in mind. Now, before you think I'm defending AMD, get ready for this. X Dova X writes in and asks, on that same note as QH Freddy, does anyone at AMD acknowledge the incompetence of the Radeon marketing team? And this is where I would disagree with people at AMD. um, the general feedback I get is that upper management has no problem with Radeon marketing. But if I ask random engineers at AMD, they're like, yeah, I don't know what those guys are up to. Like people in the APU division, people working on graphics, people certainly working on the CPUs, they have a lot of choice words to say about how Radeon handled the RDNA 3 launch, segmentation, naming, and their marketing. They think the engineering and the execution on Radeon is a miracle that it even competes with Nvidia, but they definitely do not think their marketing division is worth clapping for. For whatever reason, though, it's from what I've heard from upper management, they don't have a problem with Radeon marketing. So I disagree with them on that. So let's just leave that at that. But I think that is where you really need, like, what Radeon needs is better marketing and more funding, if we're being honest. That's what it really needs. Okay. I should writes in and we're moving on from RDNA 4. But again, if you have any follow-up questions, put them in the live chat, put them in the Moore's Law is dead after video chat. Let me see here. Dragon Range X 3744. All right, I should writes in and asks, do you see a Dragon Range version of the 7800 X3D coming down the line? Yeah, I mean, I think so. The only thing I'd say is he, right, and so what he's asking is right now ASUS has, I believe, the exclusive 16 core V cache APU in their laptops. And the question is, well, is the version we actually want coming out the 8-core V cache model, the one that I would actually want? Um, Let me see here. Like, I think that that's coming to compete with like Meteor Lake, especially. Like, that's what you want that for, because Meteor Lake's going to be hyper efficient compared to Raptor Lake, and even Raptor Lake refresh should be about 20% more efficient than existing Raptor Lake chips because of DLVR enablement. And so if you throw a Vcache model out there, that may just allow them to catch up to efficiency in some usages. But at the same time, I have to wonder, like, how much do uh how much do OEMs want to put 16 cores on the sticker for their laptop? Because I think that's a real thing. Like, you look at some of these Raptor Lake Extreme laptops that have 24 cores and you're like, that's gonna throttle like crazy. Wouldn't I rather just have like 16 cores and a better battery life, or even just like 8 big cores and 4 little cores? And the answer might be yes, but you know, people at Razer and Dell know that if they put 24 cores on a $5,000 laptop, it makes a lot of casuals with money to burn go, whoa, 24 cores is better than 16, even if it isn't better. And so I just have to wonder though if the one thing that might hold back an 8-core V-cache version is they want to put 16 cores on the sticker. So I don't know. I would see an 8-core version of that coming at some point, but there is a difference in how laptops are marketed. They want to say, RTX 4090, even if it isn't a 4090, 24 cores, even if they're all going to throttle. They want to put that on the laptop sticker, and a 8-core with Vcache doesn't let them do that. And then the 8-core with Vcache, maybe on desktop it sells fine about $400, despite Intel having a 16 core i7 for the same price. But I think do it yourself desktop enthusiasts do the research. And so they're like, yeah, but this is, 10 to 20% better than that i7. It loses in multi-threading, but it uses half the energy and it's better at gaming. So I'm going to choose that. I'm willing to pay the same price. Whereas I think a lot of people shopping for laptops are just going to see AMD 8 core, Intel, 16 or to 24 core and go, why would I pay the same for 8 cores of AMD? This is 24 cores and it's Intel. So that's the one thing I got to wonder if we don't see one. Don't underestimate how much of a factor that really could be. Um, all right. And then what was this question here? Okay, 4K demands. All right. And then I have another question here from a patron that was submitted ahead of time. Bacon House Collective writes in and asks, hey, Tom, I'm wondering what performance levels are needed on average for 4K 120 hertz high settings gaming and a AAA 2023 release. I'm pulling this thread with regards to the no RDNA 4 high end thing. I think we need to characterize where we are as far as hardware needs for top tier gaming with DLSS and FSR quality turned on. This should frame the argument for whether we actually even need a high end every generation moving forward when we already have mid range graphics cards with 40 or more teraflops. Right. I think this is a really good question here. This is actually something me and Dan talked about offline last night, and we're likely to talk about a lot in the upcoming Broken Silicon. Remember, if you join the Patreon, you can submit questions for that. But look, guys, unless you're obsessed with ultra setting benchmarking, or all of the games you're building your build around are the unoptimized ones like Cyberpunk, for the most part, a 7900 XT 20 gigabyte is overkill to 4K game and like a lot of games, like a lot. Like the biggest issue I had, for example, with my RTX 3070, what would this have been like last year? Yeah, I still had it mid to early last year. The biggest issue with my 3070 was just that it had 8 gigabytes of VRAM. I mean, I did 4K 100 fine. Like I played Battlefield 2042, mostly ultra. I think textures were down and DLSS was on, and I was doing in a DLSS in 4K high quality settings looked as good as native. I mean, I was doing 4K 100 fine. Bannerlord I gamed in 4K 100 something. I'm trying to think of other recent releases. Like I should actually just pull up my Steam here and even like what have I even played? Like I guess I had the 4090 um before I played Call of Duty, but did I? Yeah, I did. Okay. But like I'm looking at some of these games here and I can't think of almost any of these I wasn't doing 4K at over 100. That's a 3070. Biggest issue with that was even just RAM. So at a certain point, then if I think better than that's okay for 4K, I say 6800 XT performance is fine. 6800 XT performance is fine for 4K 120. It really is. And certainly a 30, well, it needs more RAM though. Certainly a 3090. That's what's so annoying about the Ampere generation though, is it's hard for me to recommend a 4K card below the 3090 just because none of them have enough RAM. But I'd say a 3090 level of performance, or honestly, even a 3070 Ti, if it had 16 gigabytes, that's certainly enough for 4K. It just is, and that is DLSS. And so when you look at that, then if I think basically set 3070 Ti with enough RAM performance is pretty dang good for 4K 120. Yeah, the question he asked was high settings, so you'll probably be mostly ultra, especially any games with FSR and DLSS, which is basically every game now. Then I think the 7900 XT is overkill, and I played with the 7900 XTX. My God, guys, every game I was playing at 4K 144 hertz locked with reasonable settings. By that, I mean, often just I maxed out ultra, which means ultra's stupid. There was extra gas in the tank if I wanted it. You know, even in Battlefield, I considered leaving ray tracing on because if I did that with a mix of a couple other settings, I was getting over 4K 100. So, we have enough performance. And I keep thinking back to um, some of the questions that me and Dan were asked a lot on recent Broken Silicons, especially one from last year where people were like, would you rather have a $2,000 card twice as strong as the 4090 or an $800 card, the same performance as the 4090 next year? And me and Dan just instantly went 4090 performance for less. I mean, it's already overkill. You know, 6800 XT is good for 4K refresh. 7900 XTX, it crushes it, and then 4090 is hilariously good at it, like, just hilariously good. So, I mean, do you really want a $2,000 card that just gives you more frames you can't see? Or do you want 4090 or even 7900 XT performance to become 600 to 800 bucks? That's what I would want, Not saying I can promise anything's going to do that yet, but I think that's a real question here. And by the time that's out, that'll democratize that performance a little more for lower incomes. And then after that, hopefully we just get some killer cards. But I do think, I think Blackwell's going to have a very big expensive design for gaming on the Nvidia side. But then after that, and I think RDNA 5 will go be high end and very powerful. Me and Dan were talking about this last night too. We'll probably talk about it later. I've already talked about how Nvidia is playing with the idea of like after Blackwell, like on 2 nanometer, maybe Nvidia would consider, let me put down a timestamp here. Exiting high end. Nvidia exiting high end. I've already heard from Nvidia contacts that there's a real chance you may get a future where like they have this elaborate like MI300 looking design that costs 5 grand, and the rest of the lineups just by modern size standards mid-range are lower. Like on 2 nanometer, they may make the 4090 or not even have a 4090. They may just have a 6080 that's like 400 millimeters squared. And keep in mind what that would mean on 2 nanometer, though. That would probably be over double the performance of I don't know if over well, it probably double the performance of the 4090 and Raster and way over double in ray tracing. Like with probably some cache 3D stacked on top of it, though, to be fair. So maybe they call it a 4090. But at a certain point you gotta go, well, if the 400 millimeter squared cards are getting us performance twice as good as a 4090, and that's probably gonna cost $1,000 or more, like who's paying $2,000 for a 6090 that gives you 800 frames in 4K instead of 400 or something? Especially if they ever get DLSS 3 actually working well or something, which they plan to somehow. Um, so I don't know. I just think that's a very real question. I think Blackwell and RDNA 5 will be super powerful. Um, but after that, there's a real question of what do we need? We'll see. Maybe I'll change my mind, but I think this is a very, very real question where when you hear rumors of AMD not going high end every generation anymore, although they never always did, to be fair to AMD, people are acting like this is a surprise. And Nvidia even considering maybe going, let's stop it a little smaller than the 1080 Ti. You got to go if they're both coming to this conclusion for a reason. Like they're not stupid. Like they might both be separately coming to the same conclusions. And it's not necessarily bad if they just bring you lower power consumption and more performance at a certain tier because they've decided, no one's paying more than 2 grand for a graphics card. For being honest, most people aren't paying more than 1,500. So I don't know. It's just food for thought there. And I thank that patron for the question. I do have a tipped question finally that I appreciate here. Probably go for another, I don't know. I'm gonna go for like another 30 minutes, maybe. So if you're gonna put in a question, especially in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, submit those questions down the after video chat if you've thought of any. In the meantime, all right. So future features. Let me write down a timestamp here. 49. All right. Toxin VX writes in and asks, "Are there any new features coming to future cards?" Well, any? I mean, yes or no answer is yes. There are new features coming to future cards. Will we see any new physics, character AI, or graphics technologies? Yes. I mean, I guess I'll try to answer you more, but the answer to, of course, all of that is yes, 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 and yes. I mean, these companies are not done adding new features. And especially when I talk to the people at Nvidia, they think it's all about the software and features. They're not, I don't know what the next thing is for sure, but I'm actually saving it for a video. I actually do have some good ideas of what DLSS 4 is going to try to accomplish. So that's exciting. I'm not going to divulge it here, but if you don't think NVIDIA is going to try some wild stuff to improve interpolated frame latency, they're going to try. They are. And they are going to try to make those artifacts better. You know, they're going to try to get it so that you do turn it on, so that it's almost like DLSS now, where it's like, you might as well turn it on. You have a better experience. And if you say you won't, you're kind of nitpicking. Like that's their goal with DLSS 4. So all of that is, of course, going to come. And I'm sure there's all different types of like new types of low latency and graphical features that are going to be coming soon. I keep wondering if eventually they'll do something with eye tracking and like foveated rendering. From what I hear, that's probably not going to be soon, but that is something that I could see happening in 5 years. But when it comes to character AI and stuff, yeah, I think all right, let's get into some real futurism. So we don't have it on nearly enough things to do this yet, but Phoenix has an AI engine. Meteor Lake has a better AI engine, a lot better, supposedly. And Strix Halo will have a better AI engine. And then, of course, what comes after that, I think really what comes after Zen 5 is going to be the truly great AI engines from AMD and consumer stuff. Right now they're just laying the groundwork so people start programming for it, kind of like Turing with ray tracing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think once you have decent AI engines in all of these products, Intel and AMD, and probably in the PlayStation 6 and next Xbox, I think what you'll see is they'll start using it to just basically make AI user generated content. So, what they would do is it's hard for me to come off with this off the top of my head, but what you could totally see happening is like, okay, has anyone watched the new season of Black Mirror? What if you have someone in like an open world superhero game make their own character, play the game, and then depending on how a boss fight goes, like in Spider-Man, the Daily Bugle has a news report that an AI engine created quickly because it's powerful enough, where they actually changed what they say and what they show and how characters react based on what you did. So that's not to say it'll necessarily make the AI characters smarter, but that is to say maybe they can AI generate a news report, like a deep fake news report that is tweaked based on how your boss fight went. Like you destroyed a building, and it's like, well, unfortunately, this building was destroyed. And it's not just 20 different pre-canned outcomes. It's exactly based on what you did. And then a neural engine creates a news report afterwards. That's totally in the cards, people, for the next gen consoles. I don't think in the next 2 years, but I think by the next gen, that's gonna be the type of stuff they're talking about. And trying to think of, like, other examples, like, just based on your preferences of how you play the game, I mean, I could totally see just things happening where, like, AI can use the neural engine to analyze like an RTS game, how the battle's going, and then maybe they build a road in a different way. And they even design the coloring and the art on walls in buildings that are randomly generated in a way that we just never could do before. Like not randomly generated in that it's like Minecraft or Deep Rock Galactic where, yeah, look, there's a different bumpy mountain. Yeah, I guess that's different because the mountain's a different type of bumpiness. Okay. No, I'm talking about what if there's like a randomly generated horror game that is creating pictures on the wall with a neural engine quick enough and they're actually new. They're not 100 pre-canned examples. They actually created that picture of something in a horror haunted house based on how you're playing the game. That's the type of stuff where like I've just thought about this now for 5 minutes and that's what I've come up with. I can guarantee you devs are thinking about that type of stuff. And so when I hear like truly new features in future cards or future consoles, that is what I'm thinking about. And that's the type of stuff that I think might be crazy and truly feel next gen, next gen. All right. I finally see there's some tipped questions coming in here. So I want to get to this. All right, let's see here. Kingfinite writes in. All right, what do I want? 30. What do I want from 8700 XT? Um, Boom. So Kingfinite writes in and asks, "What kind of performance do you think we could see from an 8700 XT, and what are the odds for a 7950 XTX?" I love to answer that question first, actually, because I just ranted about it in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord. So, if you join the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, you can, of course, speak with me and other. I mean, there's actually a lot of the people, this shouldn't be a surprise, in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord are people that like work at these companies or with these companies or even just at Best Buys, tech support places. Like these are IT professionals in the Moore's Law said Discord. And so the conversations are fantastic. And this isn't one of those discords where everyone's banned if they disagree with the one truth, like I've seen in some other YouTubers' discords. So just a reminder, you can have these conversations in the Discord for like $2 a month. And then you also get die shrink episodes, which are, well, one came out, there's just a bonus like 30-minute video that came out today. Bonus video if you support the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. But anyways, the 7950 XTX, I want to start with that because I put a lot of thought into that today. And look, I just don't know if a 7950 XTX really makes sense unless the market improves, number one, and or Nvidia launches another expensive card that AMD can compare itself to. Because what we've seen right now is that, well, the 7900 XTX has been selling fine the whole time. It's selling fine, guys. The 7900 XT definitely didn't sell well. Now, granted, it had the dumbest name in history and it was overpriced. But, the 7900 XT hasn't really taken off in sales until it got below 800. And AMD is going to look at that data and go, okay, well, it seems like they want that to be 750. And while we were selling high-end AIB models of the 7900 XTX for 1200 during the holiday season, it really does seem like now people aren't buying the super expensive 7900 XTXs. Seems like they're more buying the $900 ones. And it's a race to the bottom a little bit. And if you're AMD, you look at that and you go, does anyone actually want something 10 to 20% better? Or do they want the 7900 XT to be $900 or $800? Like, say so in the comments. Tell me what you guys think. Because I can guarantee you, most of you are going to say, I'd rather have the high end 30% cheaper. I don't know that I really need it to be 30% more expensive. There's plenty of room for a 7950 XTX. They can stack, what is that? Then 6 more MCDs for extra cache. They can go to 192 megabytes of cache. I've heard people say it's not economically viable. That's not true. It'll add performance. It's just AMD doesn't think people want expensive products right now. So they can add 96 megabytes of cache. I'm sure they can bin these cards for at least 2.8 gigahertz. And I'm sure they could limit them to 450 watts like the 4090. If they did that, you're giving it a 30% higher TDP. You're going to give it at least 10% higher core clocks. You're going to double the infinity cache. And for all I know, they could also add 22, 24 gigabit per second memory. All of those things together could easily boost the performance 15%, maybe 20. That would make it in trading blows with a 4090. But AMD knows Nvidia can still launch a 4090 Ti. And trading blows with a 4090, while losing in ray tracing and efficiency isn't like a win. The high end people are still going to choose Nvidia because, I mean, it's better at ray tracing, has DLSS, and it's a little more efficient. So, yes, AMD can on paper match the 4090 and Raster right now if they want to. But is anyone actually going to buy a $1,200 7950 XTX? I don't know. And I think more likely the thing that would make AMD launch a 7950 XTX is if Nvidia price drops the 4080 to 1,000, which is already starting to happen on some websites, so maybe they will. But the 4080 would have to become 1,000, and then Nvidia would have to launch a $1,200 4080 Ti. Especially if a $1,200 4080 Ti still used 8103, but maybe the full die clocked faster to 350 watts with faster DDR6X. So something 10 to 15% faster than a 4080 If they made that 1200 and then dropped the 4080 to 1000, if I was AMD, I would look at that and go, okay, well, now maybe we do it. Maybe we just officially, because Nvidia's dropped prices, we dropped the 7900 XTX to 900, 7900 XT to 750, and then we launch a new $1,000 card that's like 15% better. And the reason we're going to do that is because it's going to beat the 4080 Ti for $200 less. And that's just a chance for a review to come out where they're like, oh, look, the drivers are better. This thing makes the 4080 Ti stupid. This is really the next high-end card. And look, it even trades blows with the 4090. That's the type of review I think AMD would look for. It beats the 4080 Ti and it trades blows with a 4090 for $1,000. And now they've dropped the price of everything else. But just launching this now while everybody seems obsessed with price drops seems like a waste of time to me. People want a cheaper 7900 XT. I don't think they want a more expensive 7900 XTX. That is my answer to that. Now, let me actually just put down another timestamp because of how much time I took to answer that. Just make this its own separate section because sure, this is a separate thing people want to know. What kind of performance do I think we could see from an 8700 XT? Well, I think it's a little silly for me to try to speculate too much on specs uh, because I think we're gonna know pretty soon, actually. You know, you already see Kepler leaking stuff, and I was able to, if once I shook some of my sources hard enough, get some details and even more details for last night's video. So I'd assume some of the sources who haven't responded yet could respond within a month and tell me the specs. So let's stay away from talking about exact specs and performance and just say that, like, what would make me happy is if AMD launched a 16 gigabyte card that's at least as strong as a 7900 XTX that used 250 to 300 watts on 3 nanometer or something. And who knows? I think AMD totally lost 20 to 30% of the peak performance they were looking for with RDNA 3 compared to what they wanted. They still hit their like minimum design goals, but they definitely didn't hit their peak design goals. Far from them. So they wanted RDNA 3 to hit 3 gigahertz, and they were definitely expecting at least 20% better performance per CU. I hear RDNA 3.5 basically fixes it, and RDNA 4 definitely fixes that. So that means I would expect a 3 nanometer or even a 4 nanometer RDNA 4 chip to run above 3 gigahertz easily. All right. Well, so then if it's running well above 3 gigahertz with 20% better IPC per CU or performance per CU, I should just say, before you take into account clock speeds, I think that's feasible. I think they could feasibly launch some $300 thing. Not $300. Sorry, it won't be that much. Some 300-watt or 250-watt thing on the latest node that is a fixed version with other enhancements. If they could just have that with 16 gigabytes of RAM for 600 or less, I think that's a winner. Call me crazy. I think if they could get that out before Blackwell, and that's a pretty cool product. And then kudos if they had a special edition 32 gigabyte or something silly like that. Why not? Why not just go for that if it's already kind of competing with Nvidia's high end? That is what I want to see. What I think it needs to be at a minimum, and I'm going to talk about this with Dan on the upcoming Broken Silicon very soon. Again, can still submit reader mails for that if you join the Patreon. What I think it has to do at a minimum is I think I think AMD would be silly to not be at least going for 7900 XT performance for like $500 or something. Because that would be good enough. That'd be like, hey, you were just buying this 20 gigabyte card for 750. Now there's a 16 gigabyte card with the same raster, better ray tracing for $500. There you go. I think that level of performance, especially if it had better ray tracing and FSR3 turned out well next year, I think that could be the new 5700 XT. Like not an insane amount of RAM. We're not talking about uh 32 gigabytes or something or 24, but 16 gigabytes next year I think is kind of going to be like 8 gigabytes a few years ago, where like the 5700 XT didn't have extra RAM, but it certainly had more than the 2060, so it wasn't bad. And that's what I think it should be at a minimum. What would make me disappointed, this is what I'm thinking now, you'll hear about it again the next Broken Silicon. What made me be disappointed is if it didn't move past Yeah, as if it couldn't even beat the 6800 XT and it costs like 450 or something. Like that would just be like, not enough, AMD. What are you doing? So I'm hoping for a cheaper 16 gigabyte 4090. I think if it was a $500 7900 XT, that'd actually be pretty decent. And I think that below 7900 XT performance would be fairly disappointing, unless again, like, it all comes down to price. Unless what happens is they just kind of did what they did with the Fury and Polaris. They still had the Fury kind of as a high-end card, and then they just axed everything else. Like, I guess if it was like a 6900 XT performance, but that was like $300 for 16 gigabytes, I guess that'd be interesting, but I don't really see that. So I prefer the other one. All right. Simply because we've had 6900 XT or lower performance for so long, I don't really care about it anymore. Although, like I've said, I think it's more than enough for 4K, though. So a lot of people may disagree with me on that. Jensen Wang, Tensor Enthusiast, writes in with a question. Jensen, all right. Look, this is a patron. I've seen you submit this question in the reader mail channels for the loose ends today. And now again, thank you for the tip. I was saving it as an opening goofy question for the next Broken Silicon, my dude. If you see, and now let me just say that to all patrons, if you're spamming the same question multiple times, or if I don't get to your question in this loose ends, don't you think I might be saving that for a specific die shrink or a Broken Silicon? Because I don't want every episode to have the same subjects. But all right, Jensen, you tipped me, so we will answer it in this one since you're impatient. Why did gamers reject a $900 80 class GPU this generation instead of opting for a $1,200 80 class entry option? Are gamers going to force us to raise 80 class prices again with Blackwell? Jensen, I like the way you worded it differently. I like the when you worded it this way. You said, why are gamers asking for the 4080 to be cheaper? We already tried to make it $900 and then we had to unlaunch it. I thought that was the better way to put the joke. Um, and that's all I have to say, is that was going to be the opening reader mail. Maybe it still will be for the Broken Silicon. Marcus Benjamin writes in and says, good evening, Tom. I'm always interested in your insight and leaks. Have you heard anything about the next generation Switch and its SoC? Honestly, it's not really something I've paid that much attention to. Um, like I I think we roughly know what it's going to be, right? I have sources I really trust. I've already said DLSS is a major component. We're probably not looking at it beating certainly not current gen performance, but we'll be lucky really if it beats PS4 Pro performance. And then I'd even doubt that. So this is probably going to be something aiming for similar performance to a Steam Deck, if not slightly better, with built-in DLSS on every game that's been optimized, which doesn't sound like the worst thing, but it's not. I'm really concerned if it'll only have 12 gigabytes of RAM. I really recommend people listen to the latest time NX Gamer was on Broken Silicon, because that really was where we got into Nintendo talk a lot, and I'd recommend that for anyone who wants to hear a good discussion of that. But outside of that, I don't have much to add. I don't think you're going to be seeing even Xbox Series S performance. I think that's best case scenario is Xbox Series S, and I think it's more likely to be Steam Deck or a little better. And I know DLSS is a major thing. When was it going to launch? Was it going to launch this year or early next year? I don't even remember. I'm getting tired already, guys, for talking for over an hour. And you know, my biggest concern at this point is like, look, we know this thing isn't going to be that strong when it comes out, but my concern is the amount of RAM. If they give it 8 gigabytes of RAM, man, wow. I mean, wow, Nintendo, you just always find a way to cheap out. But I'm hoping they give it. Ugh, I guess, yeah. I guess, you know what, if I'm being honest, I'm hoping they give it 16 gigabytes. I'd really think they should try to go for 24 gigabytes, considering this thing will be launching in a world of like 12 and 16 gigabyte low end cards. But I mean, think about it. Like, if this thing comes out end of this year, early next year, like, we're talking about a console that is launching like 4 years after 16 gigabyte consoles. Like, you can skimp on the teraflops and the CPU a bit, but you're gonna need a great SSD, the ability to handle IO, and at least 16 gigs of RAM to even do like low resolution long term. And that's just my concern, is that Nintendo's going to choose to go with 8 gigabytes. And if they do, it's like, yeah, well, I don't even know how much of an upgrade that's going to be. All right. Not Anonym writes in and says, "Do you think Nvidia still plans consumer ARM CPUs?" Um, what I've heard from people that know Jensen well, I guess let me write down a timestamp for this. Nvidia CPUs. So, do I think Nvidia is still going to try to do some kind of consumer CPU? Multiple people have told me this who know Jensen are friendly with him. They say this guy always wanted to have an AMD and Intel competitor. He wants to be that type of company eventually. And so what I would say is probably he's going to try to do something in the next 10 to 15 years with CPUs. Like before he leaves as CEO, probably his last venture will just be seeing if he can get it, to that get a CPU that competes in consumer products with AMD and Intel. Do I have any timeline, or like what's going to go on if he ever tries to get an x86 license, or more likely if it uses ARM? I don't really have any specifics to say. And I hear about nothing coming anytime soon, but I keep hearing that's what he wants to do eventually. All right, let me see. I think there was another tipped question. There is. Da, da, da. All right. JD Gamer writes in and asks, "What do you expect AMD to do with Xilinx? Is there, well, you already see it. It's in their AI engines. They're using it for all types of accelerators." Let me put a timestamp for this. Xilinx. An upcoming GPU, if anything, is it possible we could see them use Xilinx chips to improve ray tracing beyond calculating BVH? And if they did, speculate performance. I'm not going to speculate the performance. Few people can really even speculate on that accurately outside of literally the people working on the architecture. Like on speculations for RDNA 3 ray tracing, I talked to some people who knew a lot about hardware design, and even they were off on a lot of the things. So you really don't know how well it's going to work until you're designing it yourself. For a lot of this stuff, you can have broad strokes, but all you can say is the theoretical potential, and that's rarely reached. So I'm not going to speculate on that. But can AMD use Xilinx in graphics cards eventually? Yeah, I think so for certain things. For ray tracing, the one thing I'll say is this is something Daniel Nenny, founder of semiwiki.com. Check out his episodes of Broken Silicon. He said that one of the major reasons AMD would have bought Xilinx isn't just for their AI accelerator stuff and FPGA stuff. It would also be for two reasons. Number one, they're really good at simulating performance with FPGA. So that helps AMD simulate the performance of upcoming things they're designing, helps save them money, and helps them plan the better architectures. That's number one. Number two, Xilinx has a really good hard design team that goes hand in hand with that. So they're really good at taking a soft design and translating it, retooling it to actually be able to be built on a node, like working with TSMC. So in those respects, they're helping with all of AMD's graphics cards. And that's just what I would say. Although I would also say that we'll get to this answer a question on the broken silicon, I believe. You know, ray tracing is very latency sensitive. So I don't know how much you're going to do ray tracing accelerators really. Like, I think it's more likely to be used for other things in the short term. At least that's what I think. I don't know about a Xilinx ray tracing chip. I just don't hear that's coming, nor that would really be that feasible or easy to do. So I'll leave that at that. Now, let me see. Getting a little tired. How much coffee do I have left? Almost out of coffee. Remember to get those tipped questions or questions. Man, I'm tired. In the after video chat section on the Discord now, if anybody has anything. And otherwise, I think we got about 15 more minutes before I need to get down there and start helping with the packing. Which, yeah, I mean, the next loose ends, you'll probably see me in a new studio, guys. Probably you will, or something's went horribly wrong. Dan might even be there because he'll be staying with us and have his own room, and so he'll be probably part of more content as well. Someone asked, "What's the dog doing?" Jessie. Also, Dan is a dog, and my girlfriend has a cat, so those will probably pop. Oh my god, a pup! All right, a pup! Oh my god, why are you so mad at me? What? Oh, ow! Jesus! Okay, wait. Where do you watch this, guys? Come here. Up. No, my God. Up. Down. Up. She knows a lot of tricks. Jessie, wait. Down. 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 Roll over. Roll over. Roll over. Up. Oh my God. All right, go. Someone's in a bad mood today. Does Jessie need a muzzle outside? Of course not. Since if your dog needs a muzzle, you should be scared to bring it outside. Anyways, though, that was definitely a funny moment. I should probably write a timestamp for that. That was a legendary. There's some legendary Jessie moodiness there. But yeah, so if you're gonna do any more questions, put them in right now. I do see a question though from a patron in the Moore's Law said Discord that I thought looked interesting. Yeah, I like this question. So let me put this down. We got a timestamp here. Z super sampling interest. Amateur studies. Sorry, I don't know about that question. All right, so TMC Payton writes in, just like you can if you support Moore's Law said on Patreon, and he asks, what would it take for you to care about Xe super sampling? What would you recommend Intel do with Xe super sampling? Well, look, I think Intel's basically done in discrete graphics, at least for the next like 4 years. So I think actually Xe super sampling should be an essential part of making their APUs actually viable to use. Like my understanding is, Phoenix is as strong as a 1650, Meteor Lake's as strong as a 1650 Ti, Strix Point will be as strong as a 3050, and Strix Halo mid to late next year will be as strong as like a 4060 Ti or 3070. Which is pretty awesome in an APU that you could game on battery with. So, all right. And then I think Arrow Lake, what is it going to be? Arrow Lake's probably going to be, because everything's delayed because all of Intel's tiles are behind. Arrow Lake is probably going to have double the performance of Meteor Lake, which, what would that be? Let's look this up. GTX 1650 Ti, tech power up. What would double the performance of a 1650 Ti be? You'd be looking at, yeah, that sounds about right. Like 2060 performance in an APU is probably what Arrow Lake's going to get you. Maybe I'd say 2060, and from what I hear, maybe up to maybe up to 2070 or 20, just below 2080, like maybe 6600 XT performance in Arrow Lake. Which again, anyone who says that sounds crazy, keep in mind by the time Arrow Lake is out, we are talking about Turing being 6 years old. So that's pretty old, guys. But somewhere between 2060 and 2070 performance. Having really good Xe super sampling, that could make that feel a lot better. Like that could make that feel like you can just play even 1440p on a laptop that sips energy. And so I don't think abandoning Xe super sampling is a good idea. I definitely don't. And I definitely think they should try to make their GPU tiles as good as they can, even if they're abandoning desktop. But what would make me care it? So that's my recommendation to Intel. Try to make that as good as possible. Because it's just a good, if you can make it, it shows some promise already. Like if you can make it as good as better than FSR, that is a selling point for Intel APU laptops. I don't think they're ever going to get it to DLSS performance though. And I think the free version of Xe super sampling is basically a dead end. Like I'm just going to say it. I don't know how much money they're putting into it. The answer is probably not a lot because it seems to work like shit. But the free version of Xe super sampling is god awful, not recommended by anyone, and FSR keeps getting better. So I don't know why Intel would care about a free version of Xe super sampling that they would be spending money to develop when they could just copy open source FSR or use FSR. So I think having Xe super sampling that really leverages their APUs really well is a selling point for their laptops, and that's what I'd focus on and just drop the other version of it. That's my recommendation to Intel. But the other part of TMC Payton's question was, what would it take for me to care about it? I mean, for Intel's graphics to work. I mean, what? So think about what I'm saying here. free version of Xe super sampling sucks. So I have an Nvidia graphics card. Dan is an AMD graphics card. I guess I have a couple AMD graphics cards around that I play around with sometimes. You know, but all of those are going to use DLSS and FSR. So I don't care because I don't use this piece of shit right here. Intel calls a graphics card that still can't run Battlefield or Halo properly. Because no one plays Halo or Battlefield, or it's insane. Um, you know, for me to care about Xe super sampling, their graphics need to work. Like, that's what it really comes down to, because I'm never going to care about the fair version, the free version. So that's what I think, TMC Pay. And I don't think they should abandon it. I think it should be an essential part of making like Arrow Lake and Meteor Lake marketable. But I'm not going to care until they can boot some of my games without all of my games without crashing, which they still can't. Even like integrated Raptor Lake can't. And that's been out for that's just Alder. It's Tiger Lake, guys. Come on. Like, wasn't that a 2019 Tiger Lake release date? 2020. So we're talking about something 3 years old, a 3-year-old integrated architecture. Tiger Lake still has the same issues of Alchemist. How is that possible? Why would I believe Alchemist is ever going to work if Tiger Lake doesn't after 3 years? So that's what they need to do. They need to actually convince me their stuff can boot games, and then I'll care about literally anything that it would be used with, including Xe super sampling. Matthew McCartan writes in, thank you for the tip, and asks, what do you think AMD will do with the marketed unused AI matrix accelerators used in RDNA 3 CUs? Probably something with FSR3 or something. Like, I do hear that there is something, if not, we'll see in a month. I've already leaked FSR3 is coming soon. I think early FSR3 isn't going to hinge on it too much, but I think some version of FSR3 is going to leverage it to make RDNA3 use FSR better. So that's what I think they're going to do with it. Otherwise, I mean, I'm not a professional that really uses these things. There's a ton of things you can do with these accelerators, though. Oh, there's a tip question. Give us the most we can about CDNA4, MI400, 500, and X switch to the best of your ability. Sure. Thank you for the tip, Olsome. Look, I'm probably going to save most of the details for a leak I'm actually working on for next week, possibly. What I will say is, what does Nvidia or AMD seem to be beating Nvidia in right now? Didn't Nvidia just announce some other version of Hopper? Let me check. Nvidia HBM. Wasn't there some new version of HBM that Nvidia revealed for Hopper? I just want to make sure I'm not missing this. Oh, okay. So I guess it seems like Nvidia is up to like 80 gigabytes right now, and they're preparing a 94 gigabyte edition of Hopper. Am I reading this correctly? I thought there was a news story that they're going even higher than that. But anyways, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. You know, AMD's big advantage right now with a lot of their AI stuff is RAM, and I think you're going to see them try to double down on that with the upcoming MI architectures. I know a bit more than that, but I'm going to save it for a leak video. What I will say is, expect AMD to get more elaborate, more powerful, and really try to just have so much RAM that there are just some workloads Nvidia has trouble competing in. That's what I think you should expect out of it. Wholesome DJ Aftershock. What a name. All right. All right. Let me see here. Any more questions? Last question. Will we see FSR3 supported on the Steam Deck? Well, I think, yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. I think it'd be suicide for AMD to not have FSR3, you know, decently supported on everything. Just because one version accelerates it more doesn't mean they're going to try to stop it from working on other devices. It's just going to work a lot better on other things, on RDNA 3 and later. Next tech these GPU makers need is a wireless connection to the monitors. Yeah, keep dreaming. I don't think so anytime soon. Not with high quality. Duh, duh, duh. All right. Any final questions? That's gonna do it. Pretty soon here. Need to start packing. All right. Well, on that note, then I answered all the Patreon questions. I answered some tipped questions there. And so I think this is a good time to end it. Remember, click all of the links in the description to support my sponsor, Micro Center. Even just clicking on the links helps a ton with the channel. And make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you share. Make sure you double check that you're subscribed so you don't miss upcoming content. I got more leaks, more broken silicons, and exclusive stuff coming next week as well. And then, of course, subscribe to Moore's Law Said Patreon. New die shrink came out today. Just a free video, like for anybody who's interested in this content. No ads ever on any of that stuff. And you can ask guest questions. I'm actually very excited about the next guest that just agreed to come on, and actually the ones coming on after. They've already got multiple coming on after that as well. Zion Shore says, well, your message has been retracted. Zion said, well, VR can already do display wirelessly. Yeah, I mean it can, but it's still better over a wire. You have to remember that a lot of these VR's displays are not that high res anymore, guys. Like we're talking about below 1440p per eye most of the time, like with Quests. And like what is the new one? Let me see. Let me look up the specs. I guess I might as well answer this since he gave one heck of a tweet, a tip, but then deleted it for some reason. So Quest 3 resolution per eye. Yeah, so is it? It seems like it's a little better than 1440p, but not 4K. Right, it's like half 4K. So yeah, it's better than 1440p, I guess. But anyways, so the Quest 3 is doing half 4K per eye. And isn't that at 120 frames? Yeah, it is. So think about this. Yes, they can do with quality that yo-yos a little bit depending on where you are in the house. The Quest 3 can do wireless half 4K per eye at 120 frames a second. Guys, we're talking about 4K 240 hertz right now. So try doing that wirelessly at maximum quality. That's an issue. And I think people forget that over time, monitors just keep getting better, higher and higher, high dynamic ranges, and that's why we still use cords. And while you could certainly send some of that data wirelessly, is it that hard to plug in a cord and have zero issues? I don't know. That's my point with that. Certainly, it would be nice if we just had a box here and everything just connected wirelessly. I mean, I'm more interested in when we'll be able to power things wirelessly because that's definitely going to be a thing where you can plug in a plug to an outlet and it beams some energy to some devices wirelessly charging it. That would be great, So, but until we get that going, I don't know. We just keep getting higher resolutions, higher display dynamic ranges. So that's why, and it's not hard to plug in a cable. So I just don't see that being a standard soon. All righty. And again, some people get sick using a VR device too. I don't wirelessly, but well, not easily. I can, but a lot of people do. So that doesn't even work for some people. All right. All right. That's going to do it. That was the last tipped question. Thank you, Zane, for submitting it. And thank you, everybody, for watching it. Goodbye.